live in a world of information. We get flooded by news, ideas, and opinions all the time at a high rate, and generally causing quite a lot of stress, not only with keeping up with all that information, but also taking it all in. Ironically, we don't really seem to take too much of it in. Perhaps because it's overload, but it's often been pointed out that one of the problems with getting ideas and information from social media is that we tend to live in a very small echo chamber when it comes to social media. These days, say for example with the virus and all the consequent, be it treatments and reasons and policies and all of those things that go along with it, people really feel that they're informed. People really feel that they've done research. All of these things is because they're exposed or have exposed themselves to a lot of information. They've clicked many links. But of course, as we know, why we called it an echo chamber, is that social media, Facebook in particular, is designed basically to show you things that you already agree with. The way that it works is that every time you click like on anything, Facebook takes note of that and notes what you like and increases presenting you with things that you already like and things that are similar to that, things that you obviously already agree with. So we see a lot of ideas and opinions that resonate with us. We interact with them, but we imagine that we're getting a whole bunch of different opinions going on, and of course we aren't. So it's a great example of we are listening, but are we really hearing anything? And if we've already developed a technology that is really designed to repeat back to us what we already think and what we already know, are we ever really listening? So I thought tonight I'll take a look at a little bit of what the great philosophers have said about listening and talk a little bit about how we can improve ourselves as listeners. The Greek philosopher Diogenes famously said, "The reason why we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth is so that we might listen more and talk less." And it's the kind of thing we tell our kids, but it's still as true as it ever was. And Marcus Aurelius said, "Accustom yourself to not to be disregarding of what someone else has to say. As far as possible, enter into the mind of the speaker." Well, there are going to be all sorts of benefits from entering into the mind of the speaker, as we'll see later when we look at what can we really do to become a better listener. But most importantly, we want to be effective listeners. We want to be sure that we understand, that we pay respect to the other person, that we also able to contribute something in return. Fundamentally, listening builds connections. Listening builds friendships, and it also allows us to expand our knowledge and understanding. The need to be understood and the need to be heard is a very fundamental human need. We know about needs like food and safety and all of those kind of things, but being heard is one of our most fundamental needs. It's like the phrase is often used, being seen. And being seen frequently means being heard. And you would think with our facility of communication that we have, that we are easily heard. We've all got the biggest publishing platforms available to us every minute of every day. And yet we find ourselves engaging in arguments and of course unfriending and defriending and blocking and all of these things when we disagree with someone, when we don't like what they say. End result is that we end up in our own little echo chamber where we only really hear things that we agree with. And that is really how the system works. We need to improve our listening skills. And it's not something that is so easy, because in the same way that other people need to be heard, we need to be heard. We tend to think what we want to say is more important. So very often we're listening to the words or we're seeing the words, but we're not really thinking about them because we're focusing on ourselves, and we tend to be focused on our own inner dialogue. Sometimes we're just daydreaming and we're not really listening, we're just letting them talk because we've got so much on our minds and so much going on, and that it often feels too passive to listen. We need to be doing something. And so listening is way easier said than done. Ultimately, listening is an art. It requires us to be patient. It requires us to be open-eared, and open-minded. It requires us to not judge. And it requires us to not put put thoughts in their minds or words in their mouth. We really need to understand. And so often we've got this natural tendency to want to fill in the gaps or assume that we understand and move the conversation on very quickly. Frequently happens. We might say, okay, I get it. So what you mean is, maybe you do get it, but we're not always listening if we just hasten them along. So we should always have a very fundamental question when we listen, and that is, what is the other person trying to express? Not just what are they trying to say. We listen to what they say, and we say, what are they trying to express? Is it something about themselves? Is it something fundamental like a belief system? You want to start off by understanding why they are telling you this. It's not only information, but for some reason it's also to do with you. So why does the other person want to talk to you about this? So that helps us develop the core idea of I'm open, I'm listening, I'm treating what you say as valid. So a general rule in life can be wait. Be the person who listens rather than the person who speaks. And try and speak only when it's going to improve the conversation. Learning to say less is really the bottom line first step in learning how to be a good listener. So not only would we improve our listening skills when we learn to say less, but we also want to become a more empathetic listener. We want to convey the idea to the other that they're important and what they say is important as well. The great philosopher Krishnamurti says that the art of listening is to listen to what is said without comparing it with what you already know. That's something we all do all the time. We've got this running counter dialogue, agree, disagree, as we're hearing something. And either we agree or disagree, or we're comparing it against some knowledge which we take as the gospel about that thing. Krishnamurti says, if you compare what you listen to something else all the time, you're distorting what you're listening to because you've already accepted the other. So you've got this existing bottle, which is an old bottle, and you're now trying to put the new stuff into the old bottle. So he says, the challenge in listening is to listen without comparing and without translating, but to actually hear the words. And can you listen without saying, yeah, but so-and-so says this, or but yes, but what I learned was that, or something, especially something authoritative. Krishnamurti himself says, obviously, can you listen without comparing it to the Bhagavad Gita or any of the great works or great masters, and just allow the person or the whatever is being expressed to be pure in itself. We don't listen because we daydream. We lose focus. We don't like the tone of their voice. We must learn to notice ourselves and bring ourselves back to attention. It also means we mustn't judge. We've got so many preconceived ideas and so many ideas about what's right and wrong that those tend to be filters automatically no matter what someone is talking about. So we've got to be careful not to continuously filter what they say through judgment or opinion all the time. We don't even always know that we're doing that. But we can look out for how we react. If we say to someone, you must do this, what was that, or you should have done that, or why didn't you? Very often those are based around some kind of judgment or judging thought. So you've also got to make a deal with yourself that listening is just about listening, and trust that you don't know what they're going to say, even if you think you are. Because sometimes we're going, here we go again, they're going to talk about X, Y, Z. You don't know until the last word is spoken, so let's give them the last word. Clearly, what we really all need to do is learn how to become a better listener. How do we become better listeners? How do we develop the skill of listening? Of course, the very most basic thing is that we must enter a conversation or approach the information with the intention to listen. It's so basic, but so easily forgotten. We often enter into a conversation or information with an intention to engage with it, which sounds great at first, but can often mean that we already are thinking about what we have to say and what we have to think about it. So, of course, the real first step about listening is that one of intending to in the first place, that you are there to learn more or hear more about whatever the case may be this a conversation or an article or whatever it may be. But especially with regards to conversation or engaging with that information, a lot of us rehearse what we're going to say. We listen while supposedly listening to the other person. We're preparing our reaction. We're preparing what we want to say. We're preparing what we think, hooking onto something about that. And very often we're thinking about what we are going to say next, and perhaps going over it in our own heads. Well, if you're thinking and preparing and rehearsing something in your own head, it means that you're not really paying any attention. So the first step really then is to catch yourself and realize I'm actually doing something, I'm not listening. And there are things that you can do that make the listening itself easier, the most important of which is to make eye contact. We read each other through our eyes, and we have phrases like the eyes of the mirror of the soul, but we engage through our eyes. It's difficult, as we know, to lie to someone while looking them directly in the eye. Some people can do that, but basically the eye reveals. So when you make eye contact with someone, you are showing them that you're interested, that you're paying attention, that you are open to what they're saying. And it's also a way of saying, I can't really think too much about what I want to say next, because that's what's going to show on our face. So if we lose eye contact or move away, then the other person can see that we're not listening. And very often when we think of something or rehearse it in our heads, our eyes will move. They'll move to another position, they'll look up or look to the side. And firstly, it's an indication to the speaker that you're not listening, and it's also an indication that you are actually more interested in what you have to say than what they have to say. They actually get the impression, whether they consciously realize it or not, that on the one hand, you're not interested in what they have to say, and on the other hand, you don't even care about them. Being heard and being listened to is about being cared about, or at least having your opinion cared about. So you're indicating to the other person, I don't care what you have to say, I don't care about you, I'm more interested in what I've got to say. So, similarly to that, is to make basic feedback reactions. So not only are you paying attention by looking at them, but you can nod and you can say, and indicate through various responses and reactions while maintaining eye contact, that you are interested and that you are paying attention to what they're saying. Listening is not an entirely passive act. It's not as if you have no opinions, nothing to add, or no reaction, because otherwise everyone would just really be lecturing at each other all the time. But you also want to indicate that you care about their opinion and that what you have to say is a response to that, is an engagement with that. It's not just your own opinion that's been politely waiting its chance to come out. So you can build on what you're thinking and how you want to react and showing that you care by asking critical questions, by asking questions that bring out more information, for example. And that's also something that shows I'm really interested. Down to the most basic and the most basic kind of conversation of what happened next. But another one is to ask for some clarification. Sometimes that can include referring to what they just said. But the point, of course, is not to interject with your ideas. It's to respond to those, to show to theirs, to show that you're interested in what they're saying and that you grasp what they're saying. So asking questions is about grasping, bringing out more information, and indicating that you're interested in what they say, and essentially that you understand what they say. It's not about whether you agree with what they say or not, and it's often because we don't agree that we interject often too soon. And it's better to show that you understand, to be clear that you're clear, because if you do have to interject or do have a different opinion, well, then that obviously means that you want to show that it's validly based on something that they said, it's a valid reaction to what they said, it's not just two different opinions. So listening will also invest in your own opinion. It really will give you a chance to make a proper two-way conversation about it. So you don't want to be thinking and rehearsing, but you do want to be engaging. What you don't want to do, though, is interrupt. You've got to let them speak uninterrupted. One of the most important things about listening is knowing when it is appropriate to ask that question or engage in that way. Even if you're having the most amazing ideas, even if you think, wow, yes, I know, or some reaction to something that they said, interrupting is not only impolite, it basically shuts down what they're saying and says, what I want to say is more important, or because I agree with you, what you're saying is valid, instead of just allowing it to be valid on its own terms. So learning to listen is often about controlling your own thoughts and not having to verbalize everything that you want to say. Even if you think you're going to forget what your reaction was, it doesn't matter. What matters right now is what they're saying, not what your reaction is all about. So, and if what you're saying is valid, and if it is a development of what they're saying, then you're not going to forget it, or it'll eventually come out in your words in whatever way is appropriate. You want them to have the spotlight, not you. That's what listening is all about. I mean, maybe actually they just need to be heard. You don't know what other levels are operating there. The most basic respect that you can show for them in that situation is let them be heard. Listen openly and wholeheartedly. Listen to their whole message or information. Don't not only let your mind wander, but interject. You might think it's very engaged and it makes the conversation dynamic and exciting, but we all know how frustrating it is to not be allowed to finish your sentences and very often not be allowed to finish your thoughts. We might assume that we know what the other person is saying, but until they've finished their thoughts, we actually don't. So rather give them the space to do that. The same is also where sometimes as a way of indicating that we're listening, we finish the other person's sentence for them. You know, there's some people who do that unconsciously, and it basically is exactly the same. It's rather rude, and it actually doesn't allow the person to articulate their own thought. So we've got to be careful to be self-aware and not allow ourselves to finish their sentence even if they are struggling for a word. If it becomes to the point where they ask for help is when we give help. But you never give a person a word unless they are clearly asking for help in that regard. What was that word again? Or, I mean, you know what I'm trying to say, you know what I mean? If they indicate to you, we could use some information, we could use some help, then cool. But don't insert ideas or words into others' thoughts. And it's the same also as to listen without really forming a judgment or an opinion pretty much about how wrong they are. So, I mean, even if they're right. So when we form an opinion that we agree with them early on, we tend to interrupt or distract them by repeating the sentences or something like that. When we think that they're wrong, we tend to interrupt because we're ready to give the counterpoint. And again, we actually have to let them finish their thought, not only out of respect, because you don't yet know the entirety of what they say, even if you think you do, even if it's obvious, and even if it turns out that you're right. Because the point really is that your argument or response is only valid if it is based on an authentic understanding of what they said. You need to be self-aware and realize when you are slipping into not paying attention, or because you've already formed your opinion, you're just waiting to get your turn. And waiting to get your turn means that you've shut down listening and you're just on pause mode, ready to pipe up. Interestingly, that's often obvious to the other person when you do speak, but we don't notice because we're not self-aware. If you're not a listener, and if you're not listening, you are not self-aware. As fantastic as your own opinion might be, as much as you agree with them, as much as their idea is great, if you don't listen and let them finish, you're not self-aware. Because if you were self-aware, you'd see yourself doing it. You'd see yourself forming your opinion before they finished. You'd see yourself getting your rehearsed package ready of how to respond. So notice those things in yourself. Notice when your attention wanders, when your eyes move away, what types of things cause you to stop listening. Notice your prejudicial reactions. So like if another person uses the word like all the time, it's a common one, or other idiosyncrasies in speech that can often distract from the meaning, we can judge people on that. Speech idiosyncrasies are a distraction for us as an excuse to why we don't agree or what's wrong with their argument. If you authentically have a better argument or disagree, then that should be based on the content of what they've said, not on the delivery of what they've said. The bottom line is that being a good listener is all about empathy. To be a good listener and to be empathetic, you have to put yourself in another person's shoes. You have to know what it's like to be them, or you have to feel what it's like to be in that situation that they're expressing, whatever it might be. Disagreeing doesn't mean you're right and they're wrong. It means you have different opinions. So empathy means I truly do value your opinion, I just don't have the same one. It doesn't mean you're wrong, I don't have the same one. And being sensitive to another person, being generous and giving them the space to communicate themselves, whether you agree with the content of what they're saying, whether you have any opinion to add, by listening wholeheartedly and with empathy, you allow the other person to be heard. It is not their opinion that needs to be heard, it is not their voice that needs to be heard, it is themselves, their person, their being, their identity, their soul. That is who is expressing itself to you. You might disagree with me, but I want you to hear me saying this. That's what everyone is saying to us. And with empathy and sensitivity and with respect, we can honor the other person in them, even when we disagree. How much easier it is to be a great listener when you realize that the greatest wisdom of all is to rather stay silent unless you have something to contribute. I'll see you again next week at the same time.